No one gets their channel demonetized on YouTube because they critique Joe Biden's foreign policy. That doesn't happen. In fact, very few times can you find out why you've been demonetized, and YouTube would never make it public, certainly. So it gives people the opportunity to lie. It also gives people the opportunity to lie and create this sort of like mystical deep state. When Elon Musk is about to buy Twitter, and they make it, there was different types of flavors of the right, or people, let me put it this way, the culture warriors engaging in this. You had Steven Crowder talking about all the liberal tears that were coming, and Dave Rubin talking about we're about to enter into a post-woke world. And then there were others who sort of feed into this, and they pretend like they're not engaged in the culture war, but they are engaged in the culture war. They're just doing it from like a flanking position. And so they don't look exactly like the right-wing culture warriors. They just happen to be fighting on the same side, but slightly out on a flank. So it sort of looks like, well, I'm sort of observing this culture war, but in fact, they're actually sort of lobbing little things into it. And I give you Tucker Carlson's guest on April of this year, Glenn Greenwald.
Powerful institutions on the planet, which is what he's doing. He's trying to remove and take out of the hands of the Pentagon, the U.S. government, the Democratic Party, Wall Street, all of these, NATO, all of these institutions of power, an extremely powerful, probably their most powerful weapon to censor the internet and therefore propagandize huge populations. He's threatening to take that away from them, to allow dissent to flourish, to ideas to be challenged. You think they're going to just let him waltz in and take that from them without one of the most vicious fights you've ever seen? They're going to try and destroy him.
So, in other words, the vicious fight that was going to be waged to keep Elon Musk from taking Twitter, all it involved was him actually having to buy it.
Yeah, and like, are we supposed to guess that like the stories about him fathering kids with his executives, like that's just part of this just smear of the deep state DNC Pentagon coming after Elon? Like,
well, the bottom line is Elon Musk could have bought it without. In fact, every party associated, except for those whose business interests are tied in with Elon Musk, wanted him to buy it after he signed the contract. I mean, here's the thing. Even if you accept some of the premise that that Twitter was run by the Democratic Party and run by the Pentagon and NATO and everybody that he just conveniently happens to rail against.
Yeah.
MSNBC and, whatever, shit libs and whatever it is. Even if you accept that premise, the idea that the answer is a friendly billionaire is incredibly bogus, of course, right? Because there's only one way to, he's basically saying there's only one way to do this. I mean, because if the Pentagon and the government the government is already influencing and censoring Twitter, you need to have a billionaire come in. And this has always been his ideology. He is, a libertarian in many respects, has always been. And it is essentially a feudal system to be protected by a lord who is benevolent.
Yeah.
And it is no coincidence that much of his career has relied on such benevolence of billionaires.
Yes.
And whether it was Pierre Omidyar or Peter Thiel, and I say this as someone who has never taken a dollar directly or indirectly from any one of these people. Not a dime from George Soros, unless he's like secretly an investor in Tushy or one of my patrons on, fans.fm. Hello, Tushy. But never from a think tank, never from the Koch brothers, never from a university funded by one of these think tanks. And it just keeps happening with him.
Yeah. I mean, it's a pattern. It's marketing for a tech oligarchy. This idea that all of big tech is this woke DNC thing. Well, I mean, look at Facebook. Joel Kaplan, right behind Brett Kavanaugh as he's being put onto the Supreme Court. Jack Dorsey, you think he's like a woke left wing? I mean, I know he's not there anymore.
We just spoke about Peter Thiel. I mean, what is his politics? I'm sure Glenn's intimately familiar.
Exactly, like Peter Thiel, who Glenn can't get enough of his candidates. Always contributing publicity to them on Twitter.
I mean, like this. Honestly, it's such a childish fantasy that this one chosen one elite is going to be able to, with the wave of his wand, like Harry Potter or something, come in, buy Twitter, and then challenge. If you really think that NATO and the Democratic Party and MSNBC are all up against you and they're against the purchasing of Twitter, like. I mean, what kind of bedtime story is it that one billionaire will be able to take them all down? So, in a sense,
one billionaire with a whole lot of connections to the American state.
And
of course,
it's odd to rail against elites and at the same time herald the purchase, the billions and billions of dollars that are necessary to be purchased to purchase a company like this by a singular billionaire. In theory, that should run counter to your analysis there. It should be a contradiction, but no, because you have no structural critique. It's fine to have one benevolent billionaire, which is, I mean, it's childish. It's a fantasy.
The other fantasy is what Matt says, which is this delusion that like you could have a Twitter. And this is why I was not worried about Elon Musk buying it, because the reason why these companies moderate this stuff is not just because they're doing the bidding of the Pentagon and NATO. It's also because they're doing the bidding of the people who populate their customers. And so any private entity or profit-making entity that buys these things are going to be sensitive to their customers. And that's it. I mean...
Yeah. Like, and there's this idea that like the only type of censorship that on Twitter, or the main one, is like moderation of hate speech, which is ludicrous. Because if anybody uses Twitter, you realize, oh, look at this brand tweeting this thing out that I can't reply to, or this ad put into my feed that I can't reply to. That is a suppression of free debate and free discussion. But that's important to the people who are giving Twitter money. So you're not going to be able to like freely debate that stuff. And if Elon Musk was able to buy it, he would need to keep that stuff in because it's the only way you can recoup an investment from that stuff.